Welcome to this episode of Founded in Tech, brought to you by Witham and today's host, Dave Garvey. With today's episode, I am joined by Aron Susman, Chief Financial Officer at Rowe, where we will learn more about his interesting path from a Big Four firm to the world of startups and where he currently leads finance and accounting at one of New York's most successful high-growth companies. Through getting to know Aron over the years, it is clear that he has a lot to offer finance and accounting professionals in tech, as well as venture-backed founders and CEOs. And now for a warm welcome. Thanks for joining us today, Aron.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So I've been pumped about this for a while. Looking forward to all the ground that we're going to cover. Maybe before we dive into your past, at least from a career perspective, can you tell folks today a little bit about where you are right now, which is Rowe?
Yeah, so I'm currently the CFO of Rowe. Most folks are probably familiar with how Rowe started as Roman, which initially focused on men's sexual health, but are surprised to learn that we've evolved into a vertically integrated primary care platform. We treat over 20 conditions end to end. We have a cash pay mail order pharmacy with thousands of generics, and we're able to send providers to patients' home for diagnostics. We're actually the only healthcare company that seamlessly integrated virtual care, online pharmacy, and in-home care. And so with a nationwide provider network and in-home care API and pharmacy distribution centers, we'll have about 10 by the end of the year. We at Rowe seamlessly connect telehealth, diagnostics, and pharmacy services to provide high quality, affordable healthcare without the need for insurance. We're about 3.5 years old, and we've facilitated over 6 million digital health visits and helped patients in almost every county in the US.
Yeah, which is quite impressive. Thanks for sharing that, by the way. All right, so let's go back to kind of the beginning, right? This is, at least from a career perspective, like I said, you're, so you finished school, you're in Texas, and you join a Big Four firm. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like, and then maybe just link it to some of what you learned there, which has benefited you now in more recent years where you're working with these more startup type companies?
Yeah, so like you said, I grew up in Texas, and I'm a proud Longhorn. They have a 5-year master's program where you get your master's in public accounting as well as CPA. And so I naturally wanted to work in an accounting firm, post graduation. I started at Deloitte. I was in a niche group. We were doing private equity, M&A, tax. This was 2007, 2008. And so it was an interesting time back then with a lot of levered deals, especially being in Houston with oil and gas. And I think what was important to me as I worked at Deloitte early in my career is I really found like I was learning the building blocks of business. I really understood the metrics by which everything else was judged. And I thought by understanding those metrics and those building blocks, it would help me become ultimately a finance professional, something I always wanted to do. I always wanted to try to lead a finance organization, really help a business build the instrumentation to be able to take the business where it wanted to go.
Definitely, yeah. And I can relate to even those same fundamentals and the building blocks. And so, all right, so then you found your way into working with startups, right? You even had some of your own entrepreneurial experience.
Yeah.
Maybe if you could share a little bit about what that was like, the transition, and where it's kind of brought you to present day.
Yeah, so I moved to New York in 2013 as a co-founder of a company called the Square Foot. Square Foot is a venture-backed, what people now call a prop tech firm, so property technology. You can think of it like a Compass, but for commercial real estate. Still operates in New York City today. And I think what I learned about moving from accounting to a startup is sort of the idea of operationalizing a lot of the things that you were learning, right? As you're at a Big Four firm, a lot of the work you're doing is really not operational in nature. And so you are learning about the difference between kind of the accounting, closing the books, making sure that everything on the P&L and balance sheet are accurately reflected, versus operationally using the cash and the capital you have to drive metrics, whatever those metrics may be. And that's quite a different charter between those two career paths.
Sure. Yeah, so, and like present day, you're at Rowe, right? And I remember talking to you actually when you first, you shortly after you joined there. It was maybe right around when that large Series A was going to be announced, which, remind me if that was maybe one of the largest Series A's ever, or if it was maybe the largest in consumer, or definitely in New York, it was the largest Series A. But you were there, you were the solo finance and accounting hire, the department. Maybe before we talk about things from a finance and accounting perspective, it would be great to hear, some of what led up to you deciding that Row was where you wanted to be. You had conversations with the co-founders and Zach, the CEO. There were things that you learned that you decided this was compelling and you needed to be there.
Yeah, so I actually don't know if it was one of the biggest Series A at the time. I do know we were one of the fastest growing consumer companies ever. But yeah, I came in kind of right at the A round. The company had launched in November of 2017 and very quickly found product market fit. We started having discussions in early 2018, and I joined that winter right as we raised a Series A from First Mark as the lead. And yeah, I remember meeting Z, our CEO, at a coffee shop. We were introduced through a mutual friend, and I was just kind of blown away by him and his ability to sort of squint and see the future. He was really clear about what he was trying to build. This was not about just building a company that did online diagnosis to delivery of medication, but really what he was trying to build was a new healthcare system where everyone was going to be able to access high quality, affordable care. But he also understood that that couldn't be the initial pitch, right? You have to build something to build the infrastructure to earn the right to do those things. And since he experienced ED, he wanted to use ED as what we would say a books to Amazon or DVDs to Netflix. It allowed us to hit product market fit, bring members into the platform, show them the experience and the quality of care that we could bring them through telemedicine. And that allowed us to build the digital doctor's office. It allowed us to build the pharmacy network and build scale to go treat other conditions. And those were things that he always talked about from day one. And I was just kind of blown away at that sort of clear vision into the future. Also, you meet a lot of entrepreneurs, especially in New York City, and some of them just kind of have that charisma or X factor. You really think of them as a leader and you want to really be their partner. He really wanted a thought leader and a partner. At the time, the company was under 10 people. He could have hired someone to just close the books, but he really wanted a peer and thought partner to help him think through the levers of the business. He was willing to be told a contrarian take. In fact, he wanted to hear a contrarian take. The conversation we had is that ultimately we might disagree and commit, right? He could ask me about an opportunity. I could bring him my analysis and we might say, yeah, that's a lot of risk. I might not do that. And he might say, I hear that, except for, in order to be a big business, you have to be contrarian and right. And therefore I want to move forward, right? But then if it didn't work, we all kind of own that together versus, bringing someone a plan that just meets what they want to see. And so I thought that was a really mature way of thinking about things. And also he wanted to invest really early in the finance stack. I think my Deloitte and early career really taught me that I think oftentimes when a finance function isn't scaling or an accounting function isn't scaling, it's because there's a lot of technical debt. So just like they talk about in engineering, if you band-aid things for a long enough time, it will break and does not scale. And if things are moving really fast and things are breaking, the ability to go back and fix them is very difficult. And so we thought about things in a cheesy perspective, ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And he was willing to invest the time, money, and resources to get these things right. And so I was just kind of blown away that, one, he had the vision. Two, he wanted a thought leader and wanted someone to really pressure test and play devil's advocate. And three, he was really willing to put the time, energy, and resources into the accounting function. So you lay those three things on top of the fact that digital health really hadn't been cracked yet, and it had a massive TAM. It just felt like a great opportunity.
Yeah, well, kudos to you for being able to see the vision at that time. I mean, that's a hard vision to see from where, Row had started out when it was Roman Health, right? And so, what you did was, you were obviously in a great spot, but you went for it. And it's, as we can see today, where Row is now, it's an amazingly successful company. And so we could get into more of that, but let's talk about some of the salsa now, some of the accounting and the finance, right? And so, so you're at Row and you are, like we said, finance and accounting hire number one, you are the department. What could you say about, what the playbook should look like when you come in there and it's just you?
Yeah, it's tough. I think, oftentimes it really depends where your skill set lies, but I think ultimately you need to find someone who you think you can scale with at least for the next 18 to 24 months. And you need to find someone who can think strategically, but also is willing to get their hands dirty. So when I started at Row, I was cutting checks, I was doing journal entries, I was building the model, I was building the board decks. and the CEO was a partner with me in that, right, and helping me and do those things. And so I think you really have to find someone who has intellectual curiosity and really wants to learn and scale the business and be part of that initial team that helps really understand how do we grow this business and what are the levers of this business. I think that's the most valuable you can be to a CEO, right? They are trying to think about all the different things they can do to grow and scale and hit those metrics. And if you can unearth insights, bring them plans, and help them strategically think about and really bring numbers to the conversation in a thoughtful way, that's how you can actually become invaluable to your CEO. And then over time, it's just about scaling. And I think for us, because I was fortunate enough to have an accounting background, I actually hired a director of accounting first before I hired an FP&A person. And I think generally companies tend to hire that FP&A person first. I think because I have the skill set, and most finance folks will on the modeling side, I decided to just keep doing that myself, right? One was that I knew the only way the business scaled, and the only way that I would earn the credibility to keep advancing myself at Row was to forecast accurately, bring good projections, and really help the business understand where every dollar was going and how every investment was going. And I couldn't feel comfortable in that unless I was in those weeds doing that every single day. One of the hardest things I ever did as we scaled was give up that model because I had to feel really trusting in every number that we were looking at and every number we were reporting and forecasting against, especially because we were raising VC money. But because I knew that oftentimes FP&A doesn't work if you don't have good historical data, and you generally don't have that if you don't have great accounting and great books. And so that would be a harder thing for me to scale with. And so we hired a director of accounting. She came in, she was our first hire, and she, started closing almost immediately, and we started scaling that team first. And I think having order, putting rigor behind, and really having methodology behind how we were going to close our chart of accounts and everything that went into our accounting process is what has enabled us to scale in the way we have today. I mean, I think we're very fortunate, but we are audited by a Big Four. We have NetSuite, we have an inventory management system. This is only our third year in business. And, I like to think that we have a really smart, capable crew, and we do. But I also think a lot of that came from the fact is we started that in our first year, right? Most businesses wouldn't think that way. And I think we thought if we put this in now, it will be infinitely easier than if we try to put it in at scale. And where a lot of folks talk about how difficult an audit process is, which it is, and how difficult a NetSuite process is, which it is, if you are fortunate enough to have the resources to put that in early, it will be infinitely easier. And so we always try to invest early in the finance stack, and I think it has, paid a lot of dividends for us over time.
I remember back then too when you were talking through all of this, and when I think back to what Row was at the time, it was a very early stage company, and I remember you'd hired Jessica as the director of accounting, and she had come down from, I think it was upstate New York, and then you were talking about the audit and NetSuite, and which is all of what someone in your position would need to be thinking about. But some of them would, maybe postpone it or kick the can as much as they could on. And I remember you just being steadfast about, no, this is going to happen in the early days here. And, it's not everybody's willing to do that. It's a lot of effort to do them, especially with sort of how close you did them to each other. And so, kudos to you for doing that. I'm glad that is something that you said. It's something that I just believe in my experience, more people definitely need to hear that. What about as you were scaling that, right? You started with Jessica, started to hire more folks, maybe a little bit about just how you envisioned and encountered the type of build out that you needed for that team. Maybe some of the order of operations type things that are just important to pass on to folks.
On the accounting side specifically, I think we actually had someone who even predated me, who was like a part-time consultant on the books. He had the historical and institutional knowledge, so we brought him on board as well. And then with Jess, just try to find someone who I thought of as myself a few years ago, who could think strategically, but also would get into the weeds, right? She had to do the implementation, and she had to close the books. She had to get in there and do the day-to-day. And over time, then as that started to scale, wanted to make sure that I provided her the same resources that Dee provided me to make sure that she was able to get leverage. And I think one of the things we believe on accounting and FP&A, and I think people typically think about this more on FP&A than accounting, is that my goal was not that their entire week was completely filled with the day-to-day. I wanted breadth and room for them to be thinking about where we need to go in 3, 6, 9, 12 months and actually be spending time on that, right? And I think ultimately that's not always efficient. Like we could go down a rabbit hole of things that ultimately we figure out don't actually work for us. Some people think about that as lost time. I thought about that as paying for education. We want to make sure that we have the ability to strategically think on the accounting side, right? You know, as kind of SPAC mania started earlier this year, we wouldn't have even been in position to think about something like that, although we obviously didn't do it, had we not built the rigor around the accounting team to have the financials available for that process and for our fundraisers. And, you know, I think a lot of people think about those as champagne problems, but I think we always assumed that we were going to achieve big things and we didn't want blockers. I think my ultimate kind of North Star is finance should never be a blocker for the business scaling. And, you know, that's how we started to hire. And then we brought someone else in from a big four, you know, hired a few people underneath her. And then, you know, recently have hired someone who is much more well-versed in the kind of documentation, SOX, internal controls perspective to make sure, again, like right now, is that the thing that's holding back Row? No, right? But could it hold back Row in 12 to 14 months potentially? And we don't want to be working on those things when opportunity strikes, and we want to be ready for opportunity. And I think oftentimes accounting can be the thing that holds people back from opportunity. They just don't really realize it until it's much too late. And so we want to make sure that's never the case here at Row.
Yep. Well, especially if they've started it too late, which is something you can definitely take credit for making sure that that did not happen. You know, so speaking of goals, which you mentioned on a more micro level, you know, at some point you decided, you know, that you wanted to be a CFO, right? And so you've achieved that now. You're at Row, which is, you know, like we've said, a wildly successful company. You're in an awesome spot there as CFO, right? What would you say was important on your path to becoming that? And then I'd love to follow it up with, you know, what do you continue to look at and pay attention to and make sure you're committed to so that you continue to become a better and better CFO?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think my goal was to become so invaluable to the company and to the management team that that progression, you know, would be natural. And I think the only way you can do that is just through like hard work and grit and determination. And I wanted to be involved and helpful in everything I possibly could, right? I think about finance as an infrastructure, not a blocker. And I think being a partner, you know, to the management team through our 5 or 6 fundraisers really helped me develop that rapport and chemistry that, you know, you develop that implied trust, right? They trust me that I'm going to always have the numbers available. I'm always going to bring the insights. I'm always going to let people know what's going on. I think that has been really important. I think over time, I think sort of, you think about high level as you earn the right. I think when I came into Row, I didn't say like, I have to be CFO. I started as the VP of finance, and it was ultimately like, can Aron scale with the company to earn the right to be the CFO? And I always looked at that as my challenge, is how do I make sure that I am doing all the things I need to make sure that the company believes that I can take that path, and the board as well, right? The board had to feel comfortable that I had the ability to raise capital for the company and provide that, what I would call instrumentation to take the plane where it needs to go. And they need to have ultimate trust that's going to happen. You know, we have first time or second time entrepreneurs on the Row team. And so I also had to be there to help really guide the path. And I feel like if you just continue to earn the right, prove through hard work, determination, detail, and you also have to be able to put together accurate numbers, right? At the end of the day, you have to be willing to assess the business, understand where it's going. I kind of hate the saying, see around the corner, but I think you kind of have to have that innate ability. And then you also have to be able to build an amazing team, right? I couldn't do this alone. Like if we didn't have the finance team that we had, I wouldn't have been able to get leverage. And so I think a lot of it too is being able to hire amazing folks. And that's something that I think I had to learn over time. You don't get to be the CFO of a company like Row because you forecasted well, or because you put in NetSuite, or because you got audited. You get to be the CFO because you've shown over time that, one, you can scale with the business, and two, that you can hire an amazing team. And I think for us, as I said with Jess, on the FP&A side as well, we always try to hire people that would have been my peer, right? Can I convince someone who is my peer and smarter than me to come work for us and do amazing things at Row. And without those people, I wouldn't be able to do it. So I think there is a soft skill side around just like being a leader. Can you get the trust of the rest of the management team? Can you earn the trust of the company? Can you hire well? Can you earn the trust of your own team? And then, a bunch of hard work, and then, be fortunate, right? Like, we always knew we were building something special, but ultimately you have to continue to kind of make your own luck and put yourselves in great opportunities. And so over time, it was really, I think, about the attitude of just earning your right. And I continue to try to keep earning that next level and not coming in thinking that I deserved anything. And I think that puts you kind of in the right mindset to want to do the best you can to serve the company that you're fortunate to be a finance leader of.
Thanks for that, Aaron. Love the humility. It's usually one of those things that you kind of can't say yourself. Like, as soon as you say you're humble, you're not. But we get guests on this podcast that are humble, and it makes a big difference in how they are successful and just how they look at the world. So definitely a hat tip for that about you. So you did actually touch on some of where I wanted to go next with this. So you talked a little bit about like being a good partner to the CEO, as well as board relations and investor relations. Can you talk a little bit more about how important that is, and maybe some of what you've learned about the best way to go about doing those?
Yeah, I mean, it is one of the most important things. You have to have the trust of the CEO, and you have to have the trust of the board, and you have to make sure that you're operating, also have the trust of the management team and the trust of the employee base at large. I think for us, we're really fortunate. We have like an amazing board with some pretty amazing people. Rick Heitzman of First Mark, Hemant Tanja of General Catalyst, Alexis Ohani, and Tony West of Uber. And they are visionaries, all of them, in their different specific domains, and they have a long-term vision of what we're trying to achieve. And so we are just make sure that we're always on the same page, right? I think ultimately we use them strategically. We're open and honest of the highs and the lows. And I think you develop that trust over time where they trust that, like, they want the same way that Row wants to be a patient's first call, the board wants to be our first call, right? If we've hit a blocker or something's not going the way we want, right, the board should be the first call because they're there to help us, they're there to support us. And if you develop that trust over time, it's really important. And I think, again, when you have a founding team, not just Z, but our founder, Rob Schutz and Saman Ramahian, we are a founder-led visionary team where they have an amazing vision for the future and what healthcare could be, and that's supported by the board. And so when you're able to earn the trust of a founding team that the board really believes in and has continued to execute, that also helps you earn that right with the board. And I've also tried to make sure that, I also have dialogues with members of the board, making sure that I understand what are they looking for out of me? What can I provide for them? What can I do better? What can I answer for them over time? And also, like, I have to give credit to them. They are willing to, they've bet on me since the early innings and continue to put trust in me as well. I don't know that that's always the case, but I think we just have a board that understands that who we all are and what we're all trying to achieve. And it's much more, there's a greater mission that we're trying to do. We all believe we can be not only just a really big public company, but we can change the way healthcare is accessed in the United States. And they all believe in that as well. And so I think, over time, it's just about, you can only, we say this a lot at Row, but you earn trust through frequency, right? And the only way that you can earn that trust is to be frequently available to the board and to frequently execute on what you say you're going to do. And if we continually do what we say we're going to do, they will start to trust that that's going to happen. And so that's why we're always honest and open about what's happening, why it's happening, and what we're going to achieve. Because I think this is the same is true for public company CFOs. Like, once you lose that credibility, it's really hard to get it back. And so there's really no reason, there's no incentive to, say you're going to achieve something you don't think you can, or potentially kick the can down the road, or potentially obfuscate what's going on. We're always open and honest with them, and that has developed an amazing trust. And I think over time, if you develop that trust and institutional knowledge of the company and the culture, you've really ingrained yourself there. And that's what I've tried to do over a long period of time, is just continue to earn their trust and prove to them, how badly I want to be in the seat, and continue to make sure I'm earning the right to sit in the seat as well.
Sure, definitely. Well, I mean, part of earning that trust too is having your house in order properly, right? And one important component to that is, all the data and the different dynamics there are within your department, right? And so always love to talk about KPIs and metrics. In fact, it was awesome. You and Zach had co-authored that one article that was on Medium about a year and a half ago about all the different KPIs and metrics inherent to, especially your D2C business, but was laid out very well and simple about just, it started with customer acquisition cost, and then it worked its way down the funnel with conversions and looked at things like, average order value and things like that, and obviously the retention and that sort of thing. And also how that article is used when you onboard new folks at Row. Awesome way to put people in sync and get them all on the same page. Even if it's new content for them, it gives them just something to talk to their colleagues about, right? To learn more about it. But critical that they understand all that stuff. But with KPIs and metrics, obviously, you've had to come up with a way to architect and to share that data in a way that is appropriate for the audiences, including the board and leadership. So can you talk a little bit about what went into architecting that and just maybe some of your style with how you like to deliver it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're a little bit of nerds, and we really enjoy KPIs, we really enjoy metrics, and we found that over time, it was interesting how many different ways that they're defined, and some of these things I think can be really useful for folks aren't always well defined. And we really wanted to put something together because we wanted to share what we thought was our knowledge with people who would find it interesting, and it was just actually kind of fun. I think not only do you have to have like a great business relationship with the founding team and the exec team, but you also have to have like a personal relationship. Like you also earn trust through personal relationships and being vulnerable. We're all humans, especially coming through this pandemic, I think is even more highlighted. And when we are all more familial, have that chemistry, build some personal bonds, that is really what allows us to get through the tough times, right? The easy times are easy. The tough times is really when that trust comes from, and a lot of that can be built not just at work, but personally. And that was something that Z and I undertook because it was both really interesting to us, and we thought it would be fun, and it really, it got our brains working, and we learned a lot writing that piece and wanted to put some things out there and see the response, which was awesome. And so that's where kind of that came from. In terms of, data in general, I think one thing we've tried to do is make fundraising a product. So we've been through fundraising quite a few times, and ultimately new investors are coming in because one, you've executed previously, but they want to understand. I think a lot of due diligence is just about like understanding, is your house in order? How clean is the data? How do you look at it? Can you pull at your fingertips? Do you have instrumentation to make changes when necessary? And I think we always tried to make fundraising a product in and of itself, super organized, very visual, backed up with lots of data, such that when people were reviewing the data, they felt like, oh wow, like this group really has their stuff together. It's really clear, it's really concise. I understand what they're looking at. I understand why. I don't have to dig 30 levels deep to figure out what's going on. Because we sort of say that, for instance, like investors are a self-selecting pool. If they don't believe in the long-term vision that we're trying to build and are interested in KPIs or metrics that we don't really look at, we think sometimes maybe there's not the right investor for Row. Because over time, we want to look at the metrics we think are going to build a long-term, very big healthcare company. And so we have tried to make our data collection, our due diligence, and our fundraising pitch a bit of a product such that it really shows off how well we've done that. And I think for what it's worth, talked about earning the trust of the board, and I think that comes from there as well, right? One, when you're 3 years old and you tell the board, we're going to go get PCAOB audited financials, when they know you have NetSuite, when you're able to go get big debt facilities from major banks, when really big growth stage investors are complimentary of the process and the data and the rigor that went behind it, all that sort of external feedback also builds a lot of confidence within the board. And so, I think that's more of a positive symptom of all the work you're doing initially, but it's really hard for those things to happen if you don't have that rigor up front. And so oftentimes for us, it was just thinking about, and again, it proves to the board and your management team that Aron or the CFO is thinking about what are we gonna have to do in a year or 2 years that's going to allow us to unlock X, Y, or Z, right? There are a lot of really smart people who can do the day-to-day. Where people tend to get confused, and I had to learn this over time, is that being really smart and having the table stakes and just like the kind of the skills to get the job done in the moment you're in. Unfortunately, that's kind of the easy part. The hard part is thinking about, how do I make sure we're in the right spot in 2 years? How do I prioritize those asks? How do I build the trust to get there? And how do I implement them today while also scaling the business? And that's the softer side that you don't really learn. You don't learn, at least, I was only in public accounting for a handful of years, but that's not something you learn necessarily in professional services firm, especially when you're junior. That's something you learn over time, as you operate. And that's just a skill that I've had to continue to work on extremely hard, so that I could scale to be in the position I'm in today.
Sure, definitely. I couldn't agree more. Like there's, each of us in our roles, we have to come up with strategy, and it's something that can't be done without all those critical components, like knowing what the necessary activities are to achieve any of these goals that are part of the strategy, and obviously the exercise of how to prioritize those, and then the flexibility to reprioritize if necessary down the road, maybe more than once. So definitely with you on that. So we're going to get into the final sort of innings of this episode, and it's been awesome. You mentioned before about being human, and so it's part of why I like to ask this next question. But what would you like to say? Just you're at a great spot in your career. You're still got a lot ahead of you. What would you like to share that is important for you to achieve, either boxes you want to check or just experiences that you want to have, either on a professional or personal level? Would love to hear you share some examples of that.
For myself personally,
yeah,
I think I still like to see. Yeah, I think like one, I've always had a dream of being a public company CFO. I think some kids grow up dreaming about being a baseball player for whatever reason. That's what I wanted to do. And so that is a big goal of mine in life, is to be able to do that one day. And so hopefully that happens. And then I think for me, I have 2 kids. I have a 2-year-old and I have an 8-week-old son, both sons. My father passed away a little bit earlier in my life, in my late 20s, or early 20s, excuse me. And being a father, and being kind of just around, present, part of their life as they grow up is very important to me. It's one of the unfortunate positives of the pandemic. Unfortunately for the pandemic, one of the positives have been get to spend a lot of time with my family, and it's really important to me to just be an amazing dad, and for my kids to think of their father the way I think of my father. That's something that I also want to continue to achieve, is just, how do I be a great partner to my wife? How do I get to be a great father to my children? How do I get to continue to learn and be part of this amazing rocket ship at Row? One day, maybe I will, don't understand what I'm asking for, but be a public company CFO. Those are sort of the 2 things that are really important to me. And then, over time, the other thing I would love to achieve is, I love traveling and experiencing culture, and want to get to continue to do that over time as sort of a personal goal of mine. And yeah, those are like, kind of the 2 or 3 things that are really important to me, that I get to do as I scale and grow professionally and personally.
Yeah, good. Well, and I mean, what you say about the public company CFO, I mean, it wasn't that long ago where New York in its maturing process from a venture and tech ecosystem perspective, we could easily go 12 months without an IPO here, right? And then have one and then go another 12 months plus. And so it was only a couple of years ago where we started to have them with some sort of regularity. And so, the good news about that obviously is, we've got more CFOs now that are public company CFOs, and they've been through that process. We've got a couple of people that have been through it a few times now at this point. And so, those are people that I know. I'm sure you're getting to know them, and obviously there's folks on the other coast too. But it's awesome to see that in New York. It's hard to not be proud of that.
And it's been amazing because they have a pay it forward mentality. They have all been in the same position at one point in their careers, and they just have an amazing pay it forward mentality where they want to be as helpful as they possibly can. It's the same way like I want to be as helpful to anyone that I possibly can. And I think, that mentality is quite amazing. And to get, as you said, there's just so many more now that have been through it, especially with all the different iterations that exist today, that it's really awesome to be part of that New York City community. And one of the things I'm really excited about as we get back to the office here in a few months is just to get back to the city. That energy, the people, those connections is something I really didn't miss over the past year and a half.
Definitely, yeah, for sure. Cool, man. Well, so there's one part of this that we always like to try to close out on, and some of what you've already touched on, but just to articulate maybe a few of the lessons or any wisdom that you've acquired along the way, you know, in your journey and all the different opportunities you've had to be the chance to be a part of. You know, what would you like to pass on to either, you know, the folks that are like in finance and accounting that are, you know, trying to map things out, or, you know, even to those maybe earlier stage venture-backed CEOs and founders that they have not made that first important finance and accounting hire yet, or they've made it and it's maybe not the right one?
Yeah, on the early stage, you know, CEOs or founding teams, I think bringing in a senior person to sort of own and scale the finance function will make your life infinitely easier. If they're the right fit, they can be a partner to you in a way that I think will free up your brain to do the things that you really want to do. And I think will become an invaluable resource as you scale and be one of the more important and critical pieces of the company over time. And I think it's never too early, honestly. It's really hard to do it without that expertise. You will hit a wall that will make the next phase just really difficult. And I think I would say I would be hard pressed to find someone who's like, yeah, that person was amazing, but it was just too early for them to be part of the company. I don't know that you'd ever find someone who would say that, or I never have. In terms of others in like the finance or accounting space, I think one is like, you know, I guess it depends. Like when you're at a public accounting firm and you're kind of on that like safe trajectory and you feel kind of like there's like this structure, or even at a Fortune 500 company inside that accounting function or even finance function, it can be really scary to go to a startup. One, you don't know everything, right? You've sort of probably at a company like that is mature. There's processes, there's protocols. You're kind of doing similar things on a daily basis while you're slowly kind of learning and scaling, and there is a benefit to that. But if you really have an inkling to go do more, I'd say don't be scared by not knowing everything. I'd be honest about that with the people you're interviewing with and say, hey, like, I don't know it all. I haven't done that before, but I want to learn it. I will do everything in my power to be good at it, and I will take it onto myself to become excellent at that skill and mean it, right? So be honest about it, but also don't be scared, because you can learn it, and half the time learning is by doing. And two is that, like, depending on where you are in life, like, it will just get harder to make that leap. You know, when I made the leap, I didn't have a family. I do now. It doesn't preclude you from it, but it's harder, right? It becomes harder and harder over time, especially as you get more ingrained in your career to make that leap. And so when I made the leap, it was scary. I think this was 12 years ago, but people thought it was crazy to leave a great job at a big four on a great trajectory. It was so secure. You know, I knew where to go. I knew what I was doing. I knew how to achieve the things that would put me on a positive path, but it just didn't feel great. I didn't, you know, again, I was in a position where my father had died, so I was having a little bit of a quarter life crisis, but I didn't want to have regrets. And I think what I learned is that if it doesn't work out, you always go back, right? Now you may be a few years behind others, but I think it's worth it in terms of the opportunity it may provide you. And, you know, life is short, so you might as well do something that really stimulates your brain, you enjoy, you have fun doing, if possible, you don't think of as work. So I would just try to make the leap. And the other thing I would say is, like, you can stage that risk, right? You can go to a 3-person company and be the finance leader. You can go to a Series C company and be the lieutenant to the VP of finance. And I guess the last thing I would say is, if you are thinking about making that leap, one thing we always talk about on my team, and I think at Row in general, is that you want your manager to be someone who's going to understand your goals and help you achieve them, hopefully at the company you're at, but anywhere. And what I mean by that is that if our VP of FP&A wants to be a CFO and she thinks she's ready and I think she's ready, but it's not available at Row, I should be championing her and giving her the skills to make that happen, even if it's a big loss for us, right? Because ultimately you're trying to lift other people up, and that's what you get the best work out of them. And you want to make sure you have a company that's devoted to that. So if you're an accounting firm or you're in a finance firm, you're like, hey, my goal is to be a VP of finance and run a finance department. and you're going to go in more in a, a manager type role, make sure you're going somewhere that understands where you're trying to head, although you know it's going to take time, and that will give you the opportunity and the resources to learn the skills necessary to get there. And if you can find that, again, I've been fortunate that the risks I've taken have worked out, but I think, typically they can and they will. And if they don't, those secure kind of Fortune 500 company, Big Four firm jobs will always exist, but it just might lose a few years on your track. But I think over time, it's probably worth it if you think that that's something that you might regret not doing if you don't ever take the leap.
That's right. In fact, I mean, at some point, it might even be where the tables are turned on the way that the risk is understood, like where, it seems too risky to not make the move, where at some point it might become too risky to actually stay. In all places nowadays, there's a lot changing fast, right? And so who knows what stability really exists in terms of the way it used to look, right?
I think
Definitely critical for people.
Safety of job at a big company is a little bit of a fallacy. It's a construct in our minds. Like,
Yes.
job's a job, you got to perform. Things can go well, things can go poorly. I think sometimes big corporate jobs may feel more secure, but I'm not sure that's always truly the case when you go into the details.
100% in agreement on that, and a perfect way to wrap up this episode. Definitely want to thank you, Aron, for joining us, and I look forward to keeping in touch. And I just want to say thanks again to all of our guests and our audience. We are committed to creating content that brings value to all of you. Having someone like Aron Susman come on the show is huge, and glad that he was able to share what he did. Please feel free to reach out anytime if you ever have ideas for future episodes or if you just want to be a guest. And in the meantime, we hope you enjoy and that you'll be well. Aron, thanks again for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, take it easy.
Thank you for tuning in. If you liked it and want to hear more, you can follow us and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Founded in Tech.